Hello and welcome back to Love at First Sight. I am Victoria Doherty, and this is my blog chronicling the writing process, basically. I'm a fiction writer who also writes essays, and I write historical Cold War spy fiction, and I am endeavoring to write this big series right now that is a sort of romantic adjacent series that has fantasy elements and archaeology and history and all of this stuff that I just find really wonderful and compelling, and I just want to knock it out of the park. And this week I wanted to talk about voice, which is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a really long time, but I've been kind of getting my thoughts together on it. It is, oh God, I mean, it is just such a hugely important part of a fiction author's life. Finding the right voice for a story, regardless of whether you're writing in first person or third. There has to be a certain character to the story, a certain voice to the story, particularly if you are writing in the first person, because you are writing from the character's point of view. And it is this wonderfully exciting and challenging and creative process. And it is also the bane of so many writers' existence because it is so hard, there are so many elements, that come together to make a voice. It is a huge tapestry, and not, a single thing that you just have to nail. And it is a hard enough task in a standalone novel, but when you're putting together a series, you may be dealing with vast amounts of time that go on, and the character must mature over the length of the series, which certainly can happen in a standalone book as well, but in a series you're almost assured that it will happen. And also, when you're dealing with a series, you're dealing with several books. You want to make sure that your readers don't get sick of the character, don't get sick of the character's voice, that they are able to invest in this person and continue to find them compelling as they evolve. And that is a huge task for a writer. It's funny, my husband and I have been talking about voice a lot because we are collaborating on one series together that he is writing primarily, and I'm writing a series myself. And he contends that silence is a huge part of a voice. Silence meaning, perhaps what the character doesn't say, when they choose to speak, and what they choose to say about a given situation. It's funny, he's a big jazz head, so instead of using a literary example, he uses jazz musician Miles Davis and his masterpiece A Kind of Blue, which is so effective at using silence and using a very sort of sparse amount of actual music, and yet creating this incredible melody that is so complex. I always like to use Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett because, I'm a huge fan of noir, of course, but they are really the masters of using not only sparse dialogue, but a sparse amount of information. And yet they manage to pull the reader in so effectively that the reader truly feels like they know that character better than anyone else in the story. And there is an intimacy between the reader and the main characters, say, Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe, that that is palpable. I mean, when Sam Spade is this sort of ironic guy, and he's always sort of making these quips. And what I find so artful is how he can say something that's ironic, and all the characters around him aren't sure what he really means, but you as the reader know. You know that he's being funny. You know that he is kind of looking askance at the situation. And I think that that is just such a gold standard. Um, boy, there are so many there's so many tools that you can use with voice, but they're ones you never also want to overuse. Uh, you know, catchphrases, for instance, can be incredibly useful. Bugs Bunny saying, "What's up, Doc?" You that is such a wonderfully elemental part of that character, and yet what is so skillful about that cartoon and that character is that he doesn't need it. It's there, uh, sort of as a warm blanket for the viewer. You know, they know it, they feel it coming, they know he's going to say it, and then he says it. Um, and it can mean a variety of things. It can be, he can be funny, he can be menacing, he can be ironic. It all depends on the way he says it. So, that kind of um, use of a catchphrase is incredibly skillful, and yet you would never want to overuse one, because then it's just there to be there, and that is such a delicate balance. One of the things that I have been struggling with is in one of the novels, one of my protagonists is Australian, and this takes place during World War II Australia. And so, I did a lot of research on Australian slang during World War II. And I was so lucky because a writer friend introduced me online to a friend of hers who is an American who's been living in Australia for 30 years. And it just so happens that his mother-in-law has been writing this memoir of sorts that's really just for her family, but it's about her experiences in Australia during World War II. And he was generous enough to share with me some of the chapters from that memoir. And, you know, with Australian accents, it's tough because I was looking at it and I was thinking, I was looking at my own work, excuse me, and I was thinking, how do I communicate um, that this young woman is Australian without falling back on cliches like, good day, mate, or crikey, or any of the things that we've seen on, Crocodile Hunter or Crocodile Dundee, right? And you know, Australians tend to, at least what I think of it as an American. Um, maybe I'm not quite right about this, and if Australians are listening to this, and feel free to please contact me and disagree. But Australians seem to have this very casual way of speaking, and there seems to be this anti-elitism that not only permeates the society just in terms of what they're talking about, but in how they communicate, how they talk about things. They tend to shorten words. It's not barbecue, it's Barbie. It's not breakfast, it's brekkie. And and I wanted to use some of that, but I definitely didn't want to overuse it. So anyway, I was very, very excited to get these chapters from this woman who had lived through World War II and would have spoken like someone, an Australian who grew up during or had their formative years at least during World War II. And what was so interesting to me in reading it is that I would have never guessed in a million years that she was Australian had I not been told about it. She just expressed herself so elegantly, and she had a very elegant way of thinking as well, and didn't shorten words, did not in any way try to make her speech any more casual than one would expect. And it was just it was a really interesting affirmation for me about a character simply having a strong point of view and using that as a lead for your character's voice. I think it was Evelyn Waugh, but I'm not sure about this. But I think he had said that you really only have to indicate the way a character speaks in the first couple of lines of their dialogue, or tell your reader where they're from, and then their imagination will take over. Because if you endeavor to, make their accent too strong or put too many slang words into their speech, he felt that that was overkill. And often it really can be. And as I was trying to create this character and make sure that her speech sounded authentic, I decided to mostly go that way. I mean, certainly she does shorten some words here and there, but for the most part, I have simply decided to have her speak the way she feels, if that makes sense at all. I want her to lead with her worldview and make sure that that worldview is so strong that that it impresses a voice upon her character, and that certainly, the reader then can use their imagination, and they know she's from Sydney, and she does have a word here and there that would evoke this sort of Australian pattern of speech, but I'm not constantly peppering her dialogue with a way of speaking that frankly I'm not familiar with and I'm not likely to get familiar with, no matter how many YouTube videos I watch or how many Australian films I watch. So that well, I guess that is about that. The only thing that I would add is that voice comes through more and more with each edit. Each time, I mean, I talk about editing a lot on this because I just think it is such an important part of really creating a great story, because the layering aspect of it, and you start to see patterns that you didn't realize you had developed, and you can dial those up or dial those down, and you can also really just pound the nail into voice and nail a character's voice each time you go through a manuscript until you finally get to a point where you're like, okay, I think this is it. So thank you. And looking forward to next time.